Hello, Arbitrarians! I'm your host, David Perry, and tonight our topic is absurdism. Does life have meaning? Is it apparent that it doesn't? If it doesn't, what are we going to do about it? What actions can be justified when one comes to believe that life is meaningless? With me this evening are a cartoon swarm of bees in the shape of a human, Garrett Harriman, and cactus deep-throating champion, Nicholas Harriman. Okay, fellas, I'm going to kick us off with a quick intro, and then we'll dive in. So first, let's define our terms. So, in philosophy, absurdism is defined as the conflict between the tendency to seek meaning in life and the inability to find such meaning with any logical certainty. The question of meaning has been at the heart of many philosophical explorations and treatises. The second half of the 20th century and beyond saw a spread in the acceptance of the notion of meaninglessness of life, though no definitive and satisfactory cure for the ennui and nihilism that often follows has been laid out. Perhaps the most famous and cherished is Albert Camus' essay exploring the myth of Sisyphus, and his ultimate declaration therein that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. In this essay, Camus thinks over the myth in brief and lays out an interpretation of it which centers on Sisyphus' acknowledgement of his predicament, acceptance, and more importantly his personal resolve and will to view his burden as something which gives his life meaning. We must imagine Sisyphus finding contentment in his futile labor, an act of will which scorns the gods and denies their effort to break the spirit of Sisyphus, with the assertion that a life of eternal futile labor is something torturous. Okay, so let's start with meaning. Is it reasonable to take as an axiom that life has no apparent meaning?
Is that reasonable?
Yes, is it?
I mean...
You didn't buzz in.
Cartoon bees, everybody. Is that, yes and no.
Okay.
I do hold with Camus that meaning is something you have to generate yourself. If you're going to have any kind of authenticity to oneself. And there are other ways that you can approach gaining meaning, but I also hold with Camus that, if you're going to go follow something that blindly, well, you're basically committing a suicide of reason.
Okay.
So you have to accept that while there may not be any readily apparent meaning in life, you're going to have to make it yourself.
Okay, so we're going to get to the question of can we even make it ourselves? Sure.
Presently.
Soon. Nick, how about you?
Is life meaningless? I would say kinda.
Okay.
But it has to come from an understanding that I think oblivion comes at the end. Everything you've done doesn't really matter because, well, you aren't really there to see it. You're just screaming into the void. And eventually to the void you go. But, again, I don't know shit. For all I know, life doesn't really end after death.
Hey, this is not about Socrates. We need to get past that.
Yeah. Let's just pour some hemlock on that.
Wait, I drank what?
Yes, life is meaningless. But that doesn't mean you have to be unhappy in that meaninglessness.
Okay, so you're going full on Myth of Sisyphus. We must imagine Sisyphus happy.
I guess.
You got a full Camus chub right now.
Well, the cactus isn't here, so nothing like that.
All right, well, we've had the conversation before. You and I, well, all three of us have, and I've mentioned before that I think that if life is going to have meaning, there has to be some eternal element to it. Otherwise, the absurdity of it makes it pointless. To the point that you can't really, because I don't believe that we can make our own meaning. I don't think that whatever meaning we do create for ourselves is sustainable unless we don't think very hard about it. If we don't go to the logical extremes of it, that might work for us until we die. I mean, 80 years or so isn't really that long. You could probably ignore it for long enough to not kill yourself, which is, as we talked a little bit about earlier, and another part of the whole myth of Sisyphus thing with Camus is a big issue with him. Like, the idea that, well, should we kill ourselves? Is that a reasonable response to the meaninglessness of life? So that's.
I mean,
that's one.
he does make the argument that it is reasonable, but
Sure.
not.
Necessary, maybe.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember how Camus phrased it precisely. It was in order to reasonably kill oneself, one has to grasp the meaning of life and find it unworthy of one's pursuit.
Yeah, you have to go through the process. You have to earn it.
Yeah.
You have to earn the suicide because you have to actually explore that space.
To earn the reasonable suicide.
Yeah, to earn the reasonable suicide. And what I do like about the way he describes that is the idea of going out to like the desert of human comprehension when it comes to trying to figure out whether or not life has meaning, and like the heroism of that is being able to stay there for as long as you can bear it, you know, and at least long enough to, I think the way he describes it, long enough to inspect the vegetation. I thought that was a part that stood out to me that I enjoyed quite a bit.
Well,
But the chances of you being able to earn the reasonable suicide, you're never gonna have that great of an understanding of the universe to earn it.
Yeah. Yep.
So
There's that predicament. And I think that probably ties into that whole idea of staying out in the desert for long enough. It's like, can you even stay out in the desert long enough? Do you have enough years of your life to stay in that desert, even if you have the will, long enough to understand a life to the point that you can earn
a reasonable suicide.
a reasonable suicide? Yeah.
well, there's also going back to, it'll take a really long time for you to, thinking hard about the nature of your meaning, that a bus can come across the street when you don't see it any day.
That's true.
You could just wait until the accident happens.
I mean, you could. Well, that idea of staying out in the desert kind of gets to, because what not the arbitrators don't realize this, but what kind of gave rise to this particular episode is that I had read, well, what I thought was the whole Myth of Sisyphus. Turns out it was only the last 2 pages, and I wrote a critique on that, but it kind of goes along with one of the conclusions I had with that regarding, so you're talking about being out in the desert for however long it takes to figure this shit out, but also that you... How long could Sisyphus, and I didn't actually want to get to this quickly, but whatever. How long could Sisyphus possibly, because he's dealing with eternity, how long could he possibly manage to consider his predicament? Like, how could he ever even settle on being happy over the course of an eternity? So maybe we should hold off on that and come back to it, because that's kind of the conclusion, but maybe I should just kind of sort of put that idea in your head. That's kind of where I'm going with this.
The seed is planted.
Yes, the seed is planted. The predicament of Sisyphus has been jammed into your brain.
Oh, I had to move the pool table.
The timeout on that was great. Thank you, Nick. All right, so then I guess we'll move on to the next part of that, which is, can we create our own meaning?
I think we can.
Okay.
And to say that, to lay out A, B, C, D, this is how you make your own meaning, is you can't do that. Because I don't know.
I'm pretty sure 5-second video, or 5-second crafts made something on that.
Wow. That's ambitious.
Mr. Rogers had one of those videos on it, too. He puts it in TV, and then yeah.
I don't know about that.
There's a factory.
Really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Ironically enough, it's in France. All right, we can stop belaboring the joke now.
Yeah.
Continue.
It was going mostly over my head anyway. It's not so much that... hold on. I believe it is possible for one to create their own meaning, but that meaning is only going to be relevant to oneself.
Okay, why is it only relevant to the person?
Because you cannot gaze into the heart of another human and know them in their entirety. You can't. You might be able to get close, but
Okay, well, actually makes that point.
he does make that point.
Yeah.
I just realized he made that point.
Mm-hmm.
You can judge someone on their actions. You can judge someone on what they say, but it's their actions that kind of mean more. And at the end of the day, you don't know that person the way that person knows themselves. And even then, it might be a little shaky on whether or not they know themselves. But that's neither here nor there. So the meaning that one creates must be tailored to one's own experience and one's own beliefs. So as far as what is a good guidepost as to what makes good meaning, again, comes from Camus. It's think about something you would die for. That's probably a good thing to live for. A good meaning to have in your life.
Okay, so now my question then is, how do you reconcile that against the finiteness of that? I mean, the meaning for that is just as finite as the person who creates it. All right, so how do you reconcile that? How does that sustain you when you know that the end game is that the end game makes that pursuit futile? I think that's the issue of staying out in the desert. Right, I think that's the issue that he's talking about. Is you still have to contend with that. How the hell are you going to contend with that?
Well, you're kind of making your own desert with making your meaning, I guess.
That reminds me of a comic book I read once called the Max. Everyone basically has an outback inside of them that is basically their mental terrain, and finding, I think that's the desert that you have to find meaning in. Within your own soul. Someone else can try to give you meaning, but, well, yeah, that's a worm of its own, or it's a can of worms on its own.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because this idea of I don't know what else to call it, like the cognosphere, something along those lines, where people go out and try and find meaning, is often in many different religions and practices and philosophies depicted as a desert of some kind.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk about that for a minute. I hadn't considered that until just now, but it's true. It seems to be very consistently now either a desert or a forest, but more often when you get to the depths of things, it's a desert.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do we think about that?
Well, I find the entire concept repugnant and refuse to engage.
Oh, well, okay. you picked the right podcast.
Well, in the comic, it doesn't have to be in one example, it's basically a pillow fort or a greenhouse. I suppose, well, it can be a harsh place, but this is also an outback made by a child. Not really experienced with the darkness of the world and how bleak it can be, as the desert often is. Or a forest at night, or how I picture mine.
I think why it's portrayed as a desert might have something to do with surviving in a desert is hard. Searching oneself for truth, internal truth, is equally hard.
And to an extent, I think Camus would probably agree with that there's a certain element of your survival is based on it.
Sorry, it just occurred to me that maybe the reason they're so keen to present it as a desert where finding truth is hard is so they can give you the book that says, here's how you do it.
Was that a God joke?
The organized religion joke.
Oh, yeah, okay. I thought so. Bravo.
God made the desert, but they're the ones trying to sell you the survival guide. That might not be very well written.
One is reminded of the Book of Eli. The movie.
Oh, yeah.
With my boy Denzel.
Yes.
It's in fucking Braille.
The movie was in Braille, yes.
I'm just imagining all the people going to the theater and everyone is up against the screen just like, oh my.
That, or it's just a picture, or it's just a statue of Denzel Washington.
Just covered in Braille like he has smallpox?
Wielding a machete.
Yeah. That'll be a very hard part of the movie. Oh, that's terrible. Oh.
Okay, so we were talking about, we were discussing the imagery of the desert. And I think Garrett, my view on that is pretty similar to yours. I think it just has to do with You think about the difficulty of navigating the space of trying to come up with some meaning to life when you don't have any. You don't have any. What's the word? Any definitive proof, any empirical evidence that there is some kind of meaning to life. The best you're given is stories from other people. Religion, spirituality, faith, all that kind of stuff. Now, in practice, you can find those things
arguably
useful.
I'm not saying this is a good piece of empirical evidence, but and it'd be hard to argue it's not evidence at all, is urge to reproduce, the biological imperative.
Camus brings that up, too.
I don't remember. That must have been further in the reading than...
It's a real small part, but he talks about, if I'm not mistaken, he talks about, like, how does he frame it? It's like the body, something like the body of man precedes the mind of man.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, that part. Okay. Where he's talking about how we have these biological urges, and it's one of the reasons that he gives for the idea that suicide is so difficult for us, even if we think that we have reasonably come to it. We have an imperative not to do it.
Right, because I think the body is in the habit of living far longer before the mind has... Far longer than the mind has the inclination to terminate.
Yeah. Yeah, our body determines how we exist before our mind does. I think that was one of the particular points that he made.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that the biological imperative to keep living and reproduce is, I'd argue, a form of empirical evidence.
I think...
At least at a very basic level, a meaning and purpose in life.
Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, it's a mechanical one, but maybe. That's a hard sell.
It's not satisfying as an answer. Don't get me wrong there.
I mean, that's a very, very, like, Schopenhauerian... I don't know what the adjective for Schopenhauer is. Whatever. It's a very Schopenhauer...
Schopenflowery.
Something like that. When I think Schopenhauer, I don't think flowery.
Schopenhauerian.
There you go. Sure, why not? But yeah, I feel like Schopenhauer would have had a similar view of things to a certain extent. Now he had a lot of appreciation for art and shit like that too, but his idea of the will to life was something along those lines. If you're familiar with that at all,
no,
it's actually really simple. That like his whole idea of will to life is literally just like the mindless, like lizard brain of the universe. That's maybe a good way to think about it. It's like this just the drive to continue perpetuating itself. That's it. So when he talks about the will to live, that's what he's talking about. It's not the way we usually think about it. So that it's similar to that, and that's kind of what we're operating on.
Not exactly satisfying and not really profound.
Right.
But if you're gonna
welcome
dive into
to Schopenhauer.
If you're gonna dive into this, you might as well, look at the low-hanging fruit as well.
Not necessarily the drive of the universe. I keep thinking... That made me think of honeybees and ant death circles.
What do you mean, you people?
Well, what kind of bee are you? You're cartoon bees.
That's our word.
But many of them.
Yeah.
He's a swarm.
Well, not every animal has that...
What do you mean animal?
Sometimes by their own mechanisms, they self-terminate. Like the bee that stings and rips its own guts out in order to keep pumping venom, or the ants that just kind of loop around their own scent trail and just keep walking until they die.
Now, why do they do that?
Because they're dumb.
Oh, okay.
Not all creatures...
That's not really a conscious self-termination, though.
No.
Yeah. And so...
Certainly not conscious.
I would not say the universe has a will to live.
I would actually agree with that, but the only reason I'm going to push... I mean, I'm inclined to push away from that is because we're talking more about Camus and the Myth of Sisyphus than Schopenhauer. I would be interested in that topic.
I thought we were talking about absurdism.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true. We could, if we're talking about absurdism, that does fit in, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can dive into Schopenhauer a little bit.
Didn't we just do that?
Well, yeah, but I mean apparently more extensively than we did there for a moment. And yes, that was my fault. I brought up Schopenhauer.
Well, enlighten us, O great enlightener.
About which thing?
Schopenhauer.
Well,
I already did.
I don't really know much
No, then
about
why?
I mean, just the one part, though.
Well, I mean, go like bounce Schopenhauer off Camus. See what falls off.
Oh, okay. I mean, I could try. I'm not an expert on either of these people, and I've read more Camus than Schopenhauer. But, the line, there it is. But Schopenhauer is known for his pessimism. I mean, that's kind of his thing. He literally wrote the book on pessimism. Schopenhauer, of what I've read of Schopenhauer, I didn't get much of his appreciation for art and those types of things, although I'm aware that that is part of his philosophy. I just haven't read that part.
But you would say they're both absurdists.
Of what I've read of Schopenhauer, I don't know if he would consider himself an absurdist or not, but I would consider him an absurdist, based on what I've read, yeah.
Because he's an odd-looking duck.
He is an odd-looking duck. Sun in the eyes. Hypnotizing. Anyway. Yeah, no, I think Camus is definitely an absurdist. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He just tends to be a more optimistic absurdist than Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer is the very definition of a pessimist. He's difficult to read because he's verbose and whiny. Of what I've read.
More on the nihilism scale than the existentialist scale.
Oh,
of
yeah,
absurdism.
absolutely. Well, I think Camus was more of a nihilist than maybe he would have wanted to admit, but he was more along like the Nietzschean nihilism, though, where he wasn't trying to claim that there was no meaning to life and that we should imagine that there is no meaning to life and blah, 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 blah. I know, not like Schopenhauer-ish type of stuff, but more like Nietzsche, where it was like, yeah, there's no objective meaning to life, but we should probably try and find some way to fix that problem or we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Probably why I like that guy.
Yeah, I've grown much more fond of Nietzsche over the last few years.
Especially the mustache.
I can't look at his mustache without thinking, man, it would be hard to eat with that thing. I mean, I've seen spoons that were designed specifically not to get mustard, but that
you have to master oneself and use the mustache to eat for you, like a crab.
It was about this time that I noticed this Austrian philosopher was actually a crustacean.
I was trying to find some portmanteau of crab and Ubermensch, but I just couldn't do it.
I hope you appreciated the setup on that one.
Yes, that was very nice. I do. Let's see where we're at, because it might actually be close to break time.
I don't think we're close.
No? We got about 8 minutes. Well, yeah, about 7 minutes. All right. So, let's look at the list here. We were talking about... Oh, maybe I missed it. I asked you how you reconcile the problem of futility in the purpose that you're or the meaning that you're making for yourself over the finite amount of time that you have.
Well, it's your time.
Yeah, but you still, at a certain point, if you think about it long enough, this is the
it ties into, all right, you're going to die.
Yes.
Everyone knows you're going to die. Hopefully, you know you're going to die. What are you willing to die for? That's probably something that's a good place to start for meaning. The inverse of that being, if it's good enough to live for, that's probably your meaning. So, it matters not that it might be futile in the end.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here because I have my own reasons for thinking about how you could reconcile that problem. But before I do, Nick, did you have something before I jumped into that?
Well, yeah, if you're willing to live for it, you're willing to die for it. I just remind me of the phrase, better to burn out than to fade away. That's one perspective.
Well, it's all getting at that same sort of thing, though, which, like, I can't... There's still a logical extreme you're not quite going to when you reconcile it that way, though. Which is, okay, maybe in that situation you're saying, well, whatever it is that I'm willing to die for is a good thing to live for, because then your actions at least would extend a fair amount beyond your life if you're fighting for something, for an idea that you think should exist for an extended period of time beyond your life. But that only delays the problem of the finiteness of that meaning, because eventually it's still going to be gone.
Well, you've done your part. You're going to die. It's going to get passed on. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, but your part wasn't really... I mean, over a long enough timeline, your parts... I mean, this argument's been made, but I'm trying to get to a point here. Over a long enough timeline, your part really wasn't a part in anything. I mean, those moments were... There was no need for them. You could have made any decision that you really wanted to, and over a long enough timeline, the results are the same.
There's no need for them. I mean, that's part of the meaning there. You need it to not just give up, I guess. I mean, the whole everything's futile in the end. If you really believe that, stop drawing breath.
Now we're getting somewhere.
I mean, that's it. That is the extreme. And I've seldom found anything that is actually valuable and useful in the extremes, logical or otherwise.
But you're concerned with what's valuable, and that's the thing. Like that's where you have the stopgap in your logic. Mm-hmm. That's like this is all you need to understand is the value of something or the utility of something, and anything beyond that, because there is no value or utility, you don't, from what I can gather, you don't believe is worth going any further than that logically. Is that correct?
Come again? I was trying to follow that.
You have a wall, right? So there's logic from where you're standing and logic way off in the distance. Mm-hmm. And you've built a wall somewhere in front of you between you and the distant desertous extremes of logic. And that wall seems to be value. How much value or utility is there in the line of thinking that I'm going down?
Yeah.
And that's the wall that you've set up. But there's still something beyond that wall. Mm-hmm. But you did say that if you honestly believe that there is no meaning and you're really subscribing to that whole everything's finite, that hard nihilism, then you might as well just stop drawing breath. You might as well just kill yourself, right? I mean, that's kind of the logic behind that.
At a bare minimum, don't reproduce.
Well, that's a different argument altogether.
Not exactly a reasonable conclusion.
Anti-natalists.
Oh yeah, they're a fun group.
In that situation, simultaneously anti-nihilists.
Though,
but
what about people who find meaning in destruction?
It's the same thing. You can destroy as much as you want. You're still going to die eventually, and everything you destroy is going to go away, and somebody's going to build something on top of it, and then it's going to be forgotten. I mean, all that. That line of logic has been argued to death.
All right.
By nihilists. But I think that the issue that you run into that people don't really... Well, when you're dealing with hard nihilism, they focus on the question of why, right? Like, if everything's meaningless, then why? What they don't do is acknowledge that there is even if you're a nihilist, it doesn't put the why more important than the why not. It actually levels that playing field, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going with hard nihilism, why not is an equally valid question to why. Because you're not solving anything. You're not fixing your predicament of meaninglessness by killing yourself. That's a non-starter. There's no point in that. There's no more point.
No point in anything.
Right. There's no more point in that than there is in living for however long you happen to live. That's the validation, and it's a weird one. But as far as I can tell, if somebody's going to subscribe to nihilism and have hope. That's the justification for it. It's like, well, yeah, I could sit here and think, well, all this is finite, and eventually nobody's going to care, and it's all going to be forgotten. Why? It's like, well, then, but by that same token, I could ask why not.
Yeah,
it's an equally valid question.
It's it's the philosophical equivalent of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Nobody, it eventually knows nobody's going to remember that you puked on the pizza.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of it. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of the biggest nihilists I've heard of are fucking party animals.
Well, yeah, because there's
no meaning, so there's no real consequences that matter.
Well, see, that's the dangerous part of nihilism, though.
Yeah.
That might be a good thing to get into when we come back from break, because we're about there. But yeah, I think that's the sort of the simple leveling issue with nihilism that you don't often come across, because nihilism is something that they don't really acknowledge all that much. But a nihilistic view of the universe or of reality or whatever you want to call it is still an emotional reaction to the way you're experiencing it. That's all it is. There's ennui and all that other shit that's involved in being a nihilist. It's still an emotional reaction to it. And you got to be able to step outside of that if you're going to look at it as logically as nihilists like to claim that they do.
Well, since we're coming up on break, I would like to
Yep.
remind our listeners that when we're talking about meaninglessness, it doesn't apply to giving our sponsors your money.
That is your meaning.
Yes.
That is how we determine meaning around the Arbitrarium.
Buy our book.
We don't have a book yet, but there will be one. We should write a book.
Oh, God.
It'll have pictures.
Yeah.
It'll be a pop-up.
It will. It'll be like a 3,000-page pop-up
Oh, God.
I'd love to see when we finally get to fucking aliens.
in volumes.
You won't be able to put that in a library.
All right, and with that, we're going to take our first commercial break. All right, and we're back. I think we're going to start this section off with a bit of story time with Garrett on the topic of meaning and his life. Go on.
Well,
Or begin, rather.
which is it?
Begin.
Begin?
Right now.
But you said go on.
At the end of the sentence
Get on with it!
that I'm speaking.
Are you speaking?
Period.
So, speaking of creating one's own meaning, as a single young man without progeny, I had a different understanding of meaning in life. Having gotten married, and now have a child, your perspective does change on what is meaning, what is acceptable meaning, why do you get up in the morning, why do you continue to live, and it's a sappy romantic notion, but nonetheless true, that these are now my wife, my son. They give me meaning when all other things fail to do so.
Well, sappy and saccharine as it is, it's saved millions of lives over the period of history.
Well, there's certainly something to be
Give
said
meaning to it.
if you're even just trying to go, I don't know, philosophically and logically about it. There's certainly something to be said for, well, even if I can't figure this shit out, I need to make sure that this person lives long enough just in case they can.
Right.
Right?
I guess. More so on Christopher than my wife.
Right. You've already given up on her.
Yeah.
Let's hope she doesn't listen to the podcast.
She's literally sitting like 10 feet away.
More like 12.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Those 2 feet might actually be the difference.
Maybe 14.
Even better.
Yeah, so.
That's where I was going with there.
What do you think the source of... Good, sorry.
Prior to that, there were other things that I believed gave me meaning. At some point, they probably did. You don't join the infantry out of a sense of selfishness, I'll say that much.
Unless you really like shooting people.
I wasn't even going to go with that. If I was going to question, I would have gone in a completely different direction, which is, GI Bill and stuff like that. Like, I want to go to college and I can't afford it, so maybe I could just go into the military, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but there's a difference between going into the military and then going into the, last 100 yards of American foreign policy where you are going to get shot at.
Well, yeah, I mean...
You could go into water treatment specialist or veterinary specialist or, a rear echelon position. You don't go frontline combat voluntarily.
Are there alligators in the infantry?
I thought I knew a guy in Delta Company.
I mean, yeah, plenty of people go in and all they end up doing is basically they wind up flipping burgers. Just on a huge scale for hundreds of men, but yeah, there are positions that aren't that different from outside the private sector. That just because they have to be done in the field.
Yeah, a lot of those were being phased out, but
yeah, I hear there was actually.
Unless having gotten married and had a kid, I have to think a lot more about situations I would willingly charge into machine gun fire for. If that makes any sense. I'm less likely to throw my life away in pursuit of an abstract good.
Well, your life has more stakes than just the ideology that you could possibly follow.
Right.
You have people who are reliant on you in more fundamental ways than your own personal ideologies.
Right.
That actually, I think that leads to a lot of people who go to college and get indoctrinated into certain political ideologies. Why they willingly go out and throw themselves into violent situations. They don't really have much meaning in their life outside of it. They usually don't have kids. They don't really have some of them don't even have a future because they went into feminist underwater basket weaving.
I happen to minor in feminist underwater basket weaving. This podcast is over. That was a joke.
Yeah, I knew you were lying through your teeth.
Yeah,
Everyone knew that.
Yeah, and I was going to hold
which
you
is
down
much
so we
harder now
continued
that there's no
anyway.
gap.
I mean,
really?
the producer even scoffed at that one. I don't know if you heard that.
Well, it worked.
But he wheezed after you said that, so...
He wheezed?
Yeah.
You wheezed?
Mm-hmm.
You're lucky I can't fire you. Wheezed.
I mean, we could throw him on the grill real quick.
If for no other reason than the practical fact that you spent thousands of dollars to make sure he didn't die.
Most expensive bit of meat I ever had.
I love the producer quite a bit. But if the shit hits the fan, I'm going to keep him around. partly for emotional support, but the bigger part is emergency rations if necessary.
He would legitimately do the same for you.
Yeah, cats are one of those animals that, even quicker than dogs, are willing to eat their dead owners. Anyway,
So that was my 2-bit on personal meaning.
I think along with that, there's kind of this idea that, and I mean, I'm not married and I don't have children or anything, but one of the thoughts I was thinking about, because I try to go at it as many different angles as I can, and one of those is that sort of like biological urge to continue some version of yourself into the future. And for some people, that ends up being like, well, let's say a philosophy book or a cartoon series or something along those lines if you don't have children. It's that same idea of sort of projecting yourself into the future.
I was going to say, I'm not picking up any projection at all right now.
or, terrorizing someone so much they'd never forget you.
That also.
Well, it's, again, going to the dark impulses and how they can be used to find a very sick form of meaning.
Yeah, well, I mean, when there is a lack of any other effortful pursuit, that one's a pretty easy one. It's actually not that difficult. Well, maybe, I don't know. It's not that difficult to terrorize one person. It's probably not even that difficult to terrorize a couple of people. It's actually kind of difficult to terrorize a large group of people without a certain amount of power. I think that's a whole different conversation, but that got me thinking.
Let's not add to the Austrian politician meter.
Yes. That's actually a little bit more challenging, because eventually somebody's going to catch on to what you're doing.
You don't necessarily have to have power in the traditional sense. Just authority.
Well, oh yeah, that's fair.
Because you can terrorize a lot of people and tell them it's for your own good, or for their own good.
That's all.
Just keep feeding them information that scares the shit out of them.
Yeah, that'll work.
This is also a case where one person cannot actually have any official power, but think of the terror that is spread by serial killers. The Zodiac Killer, Torso Killer. They're always just called a killer, aren't they? The exception of MDK. No, wait, no. No.
BTK?
Yeah, BTK.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure the K stood for killer.
It did. It did.
Oh. Damn it.
Or kill, it actually just... But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, the idea is there.
Yeah. He's certainly not, no, I was going to make a shitty joke.
I was waiting to see how dark that was going to get.
I chose to keep it dead.
All right.
Burger Torture King.
That just makes me think of that scene from Better Off Dead, where he's making the burger and they play the the Van Halen song.
Yeah.
Everybody wants some.
I'm not thought about that movie in a while.
That's so good. Where was I going with that?
Seeking immortality.
Yeah. So, well, not necessarily immortality, but something like just at least projecting yourself in some way into the future. And I don't know, I think there's something to be said for the idea that, like, once you have a kid, it's like, okay, I don't know what is in the future for this kid, but it might be something a lot better than I can conceive of. And so that in and of itself is enough of a justification to throw out all of the nihilistic musings I may have once had and just take a risk on making sure that this child survives and becomes an adult and does something that isn't horribly shitty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, every parent fucks their kid up. It's just some are more socially
There was
acceptable
there was a very important word in that sentence.
Every?
I was going to go with up. But
Oh, yes.
yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, every parent, whether intentionally or not intentionally, causes problems for their kid. It's just inevitable because you just have that effect on people in general, and your kid is around you a lot.
Yeah, they're going to pick up neuroses. Mm-hmm. If you've done your job well, they are manageable.
If you're responsible, they can get past them without you feeling defensive about it.
If you're absolutely disgusting, you implanted them via genetic engineering.
It's a roundabout way to do something you don't have to go through science to do.
Yeah, I know.
I prefer the intimate, old-fashioned way of...
Artisanal neurosis.
Just rubbing dirt on somebody's brain.
Well, they're in the womb, nonetheless.
Yes. It's just that bread powder, flour. Bread powder, that's what I call bread powder. Yeah, it's flour.
Well, I think we got a call from them to be a sponsor, but, I don't know if we'll go with it.
Powdered toast man.
Yes, powdered toast man. Okay, well, let's see. Hang on a second. Let's see where we're at on time.
We got plenty.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
We got oodles.
So let's advance the plot a bit.
Yeah, let's see where we can go from here. So, one of the questions I considered asking is, what scenario of existence is required to assume that life is absurd? So maybe that's kind of a clunky way of asking that question. So can there be a God and also conclude that life is absurd and meaningless? Like, how do we connect? How do we navigate the space of meaning and God at the same time? Can you have meaning without God? Does introducing a God automatically introduce meaning? Those types of questions.
I'd say introducing God automatically introduces meaning, whether we can understand it or not.
I think that's true as well.
That doesn't necessarily apply to the Celtic gods. They weren't. Well, then again, they weren't really treated as deities, just entities to be respected. They didn't really tell you to do anything. Just fuck with you.
So just mischievous, not even gods, like mischievous managers.
Yeah, the one got a piece of cheese thrown so hard at her head that she died.
Wow.
Celtic myth is weird.
They couldn't even come up with a god that could stand up to a hard cheese.
It was a very hard throw.
I don't know, man. I've seen some Parmesans in my day.
I don't think we can go anywhere more productive than that with this podcast. I think we've peaked.
I hope not.
But again,
I had high hopes for this podcast.
You're kind of sticking with the I think you're sticking with the Judeo-Christian God, the one that's
Well, I personally do, but that question wasn't that specific.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
You could also go into the gods of the ancient Aztecs and other Mesoamerican civilizations. Mm-hmm. Man had a purpose, and it was basically, we created you in the universe, now give some of that blood back.
So there's a sense of give and take with those gods and what they created.
And often in a pretty messed up way.
So the humans in that conception were created with a quid pro quo.
They're the snack cabinet.
A what now?
They're the snack cabinet.
A snack cabinet?
Humans were the snack cabinet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So they created us so that they could eat us.
Kind of, yeah. Just real slow-like.
Okay.
More like cattle. Or corn.
Okay. Yep, don't like those gods. Not surprised they didn't last.
I mean, they lasted for a few thousand years, but...
then Cortez showed up.
Yeah.
Cortez the Killer?
Nah, Cortez the Conqueror.
It's a Dave Matthews song. Well, actually, that might be a cover of a different song. But they did it.
Yeah. But I do agree, in the case of a lot of gods, that was the point. I mean, in Norse mythology, the gods created man, but I can't remember why. Again, it's another example where, no, in classical and Norse mythology, it's mostly just gods fucking with humans. To kind of give example of, well, mostly parables to illustrate certain philosophical concepts and rules of the game, basically.
Like what?
Sisyphus.
Oh, well. That is the topic du jour.
And, what was it? Lycan. Don't try to trick the gods, they'll turn you into a frickin' werewolf.
That's fair.
Don't feed don't really mess around with Hera or be lashed to a burning wheel for eternity.
What if that's exactly why I messed around with Hera?
Well, I'd say that's...
I'm better off than Sisyphus, that's for damn sure.
Tantalus also doesn't have things very good, but I can't remember exactly what he did. they're usually supposed to have some
Lived up to his namesake.
trapped in a pond that would always, sink lower when he tried to drink it, and there are fruit trees above that. He's hungry as fuck, trying to get up there, like give me some fruit, but they always go, whoop, no.
Yeah, those guys are real big into that whole futility thing.
Yeah,
as a punishment. Yeah.
yeah. Futility to the gods seems like it's like that's what they think is horrifying.
Well, are they wrong? Actually, hold that thought, because we're getting there. I was actually going to address something there, and I'm spacing out on what it was.
That's what happens when you're making a cocktail trying to think of things.
Hey, I've thought of stuff while making cocktails, mostly how to make more cocktails. But
You want some ice there, buddy?
well, there's no ice down here, as far as I know.
No, there's ice.
In the fridge down here?
Freezer, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there is now. Okay, well, there wasn't before. I've already made it. We'll handle that later.
Okay.
Though, just before we move on, maybe that's what humanity really has over the gods. Absurdity. We can accept that things are meaningless. So what they throw at us doesn't really do anything eventually.
I would, and see, we're getting there too. I would argue that that
Okay.
is not the case, because it's real easy for people to just kind of take for granted what eternity actually means when it comes to, well, anything, but certainly torment. That I think that in my view, that is Camus' fatal flaw with this whole Myth of Sisyphus issue, is the idea that Sisyphus could be sustained. It's one thing to tell somebody that they could be sustained that way for a lifetime. It is an incomparable thing to say that somebody could sustain themselves that way for a literal eternity. That's a very different issue. Yeah, we kind of... It's hard for us to really even conceive or conceptualize eternity in that way.
Well, one of the questions you listed off, listeners, he did describe some of the questions he has on a list to keep the conversation flowing.
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, on the nature of eternity and punishment in this case, can we call gods good if they're willing to punish the living, the mortals?
Well, okay, so you mentioned something else that kind of goes along the lines of one of the points that I made in the critique of the Myth of Sisyphus, where we were talking about the... well, we'll just get into this. The idea of what humans were created for. You were talking about that.
Okay.
And I think a good, for me anyway, a good comparison or a good critique of whether or not a god is, believing in a particular god is reasonable, is the coherence of the god and why they created people. Like with those Celtic gods, it's like, that's, how the hell, like what? I'm sorry, what? I can't make logical sense of that, really.
I actually have to read back up on my Celtic mythology. I am not exactly... I don't remember whether they created man or if they're just cohabiting with man.
Yeah, I would need to know more details on that, because just based on what you described, it feels very Wachowskian. I'll call it that. Wachowskian. It's like, yeah, really? You're going to create humans? You're going to create creatures who can think and feel and suffer just so you can eat them? Like, why not create cows? Like they can suffer to a certain extent, but why not create something just for the meat, so that there is no suffering? Like there's a lot of, if something's going to be sapient, then you have to deal with then you have to contend with what their suffering means.
Maybe that's what they're reading.
Maybe that's the thing that sustains them, is the literal sapience. Maybe there is something sustaining
The suffering.
them. Yeah, the suffering of sapient, of something
Spices
sapient.
it.
That does... okay, good.
I drink your ennui.
well,
I drink it up.
it certainly means that Clive Barker will be a very good prophet.
What about Clive Owen?
Well, I don't know how much Clive Owen tortures people, but I know Clive Barker wrote...
Have you seen his movies?
Have you seen Clive Barker's?
I couldn't pass up the joke, even though I like Clive Owen in quite a few movies.
You beat me to it.
Yeah.
There's a very Billy Crystal joke there.
I mean, one could also try finding meaning in suffering itself, which is which is the Cenobites of Hellraiser and Hellbound Heart.
I mean, that's sort of the Camusian, if that's the way to say that, the Camusian argument with Sisyphus. But what I was getting at is that the relationship between the god that you're proposing and the meaning of the creature that he creates. So, like then maybe I can justify this a little bit. The reason that for me the Judeo-Christian God makes the most sense, at least compared to other gods, is that if you go back and you look at the story of creation of Adam and Eve and all the things that followed that, I can actually parse that out in a way that is understandable, because one of the reasons, and we've had this conversation too, so like when you're talking about the story of Adam and Eve, you've got, Adam and Eve, this is something that people seem to forget pretty often, is that when, in that story, in that mythology, we were not created as free, as creatures of necessarily, as free-thinking creatures necessarily. And when I say that, I mean that we weren't created. When we were created, we were put in a space where we didn't know everything, or we didn't even have access to the knowledge of everything. There was the option of having that access, which is the tree, right? People misconstrue that as the tree of knowledge. And if you do that, then it's easy to look at God as a bastard, right? But if you actually understand because it's not just the tree of knowledge, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is an extremely important distinction to make. So when we were created in the whole Garden of Eden and all that, we were protected from the understanding of what good and evil was. So we couldn't be blamed for our actions. Like, we didn't have any accountability. There was no official accountability. Moral agency. Right. We had no moral agency because we didn't know the difference between good and evil. Listeners,
we've actually had this conversation before, but he's laying it out for you.
Yeah. There's actually quite a bit of that in this particular episode. Once we get back to Camus, we'll get back to the newer stuff. But so you're created in a situation where we didn't know the difference between good and evil, and we had the option of knowing the difference between good and evil. That's what the whole temptation thing is. And then when we decided, in one way or another, seems like the inevitable thing that we would do, to bite the apple and then be
a long enough timeline, everything's eating that apple.
Yeah. And then
I believe it was originally a pomegranate.
The goats.
Oh, that could be that.
Because it was Milton who came across with the apple thing.
Fair enough, yeah. So when we run into that problem a lot with biblical history, right? The conflation of actual biblical history with...
when the fan fiction becomes the canon.
Yeah.
What? Maybe you should have made it a durian.
Yeah, maybe then we wouldn't have eaten it.
No, but some other fucking monkey would have.
That's true. And then we would have had Planet of the Apes. Actually, yeah, that's about how that would have worked. I've never thought about that before, but that's about how that would have worked.
You were just the first primate lucky enough to eat it.
So yeah, we take a bite of the apple, then we have the understanding of good and evil, and when you have the understanding of good and evil, then you have accountability. You're responsible for your actions, so on and so forth. So that's an important distinction to make. In that origin story, I can make sense of why things happened the way that it did, and I don't have to look at God as a bastard, because I understand that the idea there, the key idea, is that we have free will, and if we're going to have free will, then we have to have access to all of that knowledge.
I suppose that does really...
to make our choices mean anything.
Yeah.
That does really throw out that in that context, you can have God as the good guy. The Greek gods, though, pretty much entirely assholes.
Yeah, that's why I don't believe in Greek mythology.
Well, I mean...
entertaining though it may be.
Yeah, I mean, the story of Pandora, the reason that there are men and women in that setting, or in Greek mythology, is because one of us clever little fuckers managed to trick Zeus into taking the guts, the offal from the animal, and the bones, instead of the meat, because, well, it's white. That means it's, purer, right?
So what you're trying to say is that Zeus really got into bukkake.
Well, I'd say it was man tricking God, or tricking a god again, and so man and woman were split up, and ever seeking their missing half. And hell, look at the story of Medusa if you want to see how much of a dick gods are.
I see that as a failing of man, that when Pandora opens her box, nobody comes running.
Well, in the story of Medusa's origin, all she really did was got raped in Athena's temple by Poseidon. So not even agency on her part, just gods being dicks to each other.
Yeah. That is the entertainment quality of Greek mythology, but it's also the thing that made it, unreasonable or unsustainable for any. Well, it lasted for a while, but certainly not sustainable for forever.
You certainly can't tell some of the stories in a movie for kids. I'm looking at you, Zeus, and your ducks and bulls.
See, I wonder with situations like that with Greek mythology, and I would say in modern day with Hinduism, because this is actually a documented issue with Hinduism among people who are Hindi, and they talk about this fairly often.
Hindi's the language.
Oh, right. Well, that are Hindu. But that idea that, like, there isn't necessarily among a lot of Hindu people a strict belief in the mythology as there is an upholding of the traditions of the mythology. Like that's a common discussion topic for people who are Hindu. I've often wondered if that's a similar case, or was a similar case with Greek mythology for a long time, because when you have gods like that and stories like that, it just, you wonder how long. You wonder how long those types of stories, especially among people who were reasonable enough to deliver us characters like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all them, like how long could they have believed in gods that had stories around them that were that outlandish and to a certain extent incoherent, or at least not cohesive. I wonder how long it took before those stories became more respected by allegory.
It wasn't long.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so.
I mean, wow, that's one of the reasons why the Greco-Roman myths were, or the pagans who followed Greco-Roman traditions were quite quickly integrated and usurped by monotheists.
Because they were just kind of resolved, like, well, all that was kind of bullshit anyway. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah, they probably figured that out the second they tried to create an empire by throwing some children to wolves.
Didn't work, did it?
Except they did, according to the myth.
Oh, well, that's true.
Well, they tried to do it again to make another empire, and what happened?
Wait, when did they try that again?
We don't know. It failed.
No.
Well, you mentioned
You're
so we know.
You're actually getting into history now, so when did they actually try that?
I'm making a joke.
Well, it wasn't clear that you were making a joke.
You can't...
I understood that there was a joke there, but it seemed like it was based on a historical event.
Throwing babies to wolves does not give you an emperor. It gives you a wolf that's eating babies.
Okay, parsing out that situation is going to take too long.
Okay.
Where are we at on time? We're probably beyond time, actually. Actually, right at 20. We got 1 minute.
How about that local sports team and or college?
Because I feel like we have one. You know what? 1 minute's not much. Let's just go ahead and go to our sponsor, and when we come back, we will jump immediately back into the actual Camus and Myth of Sisyphus issue. We have some conclusion-based questions.
Didn't expect the right turn into mythology.
Well, you know what happens. This is the Arbitrarium. You created it. You should have expected it.
No, I didn't expect it. That's the whole point. I don't expect anything.
Oh, so that wasn't a derision.
Right.
Okay.
That was not. It's just an observation.
Okay.
Nobody saw the a la carte episodes coming. Not at the aliens.
Well, on that note, we're gonna go to our sponsor.
Bye.
Okay, and we're back. So, on this last little bit, we're going to kind of talk. We're going to try to circle back to the myth of Sisyphus and Camus', I guess, assessment of it, and kind of explore Sisyphus's particular predicament of trying to find, well, trying to create his own meaning to stave off the futility, the eternal futility of his task of rolling the boulder up the mountain just for it to fall back down and for him to push it back up, right? So Camus has this idea that Sisyphus could find meaning in... It's kind of hard to describe that. It's that he would find meaning in the fact of the task itself. Like that, I mean, that's part of it.
I took it as he found meaning through the acceptance of the absurdity of his own situation.
Yeah.
And it's more the acceptance part of it than the absurdity.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
This shit's my this is bullshit, but it's my bullshit.
I think it's easier to make that argument when you're dealing with a lifetime. But we're talking about a character who's trying to do this for eternity. I mean, that's an important distinction to make.
I'm forced to do it for eternity.
Forced to do it for eternity because he has no way of killing himself.
He's already dead.
Well, right, but he has no way of killing himself again. He can't escape this fate. That's the point that we're getting at.
Did you decide to start doing the rock
See,
thing?
the question that I have with Sisyphus is, what happens if he... Yeah, I'm not going to roll this thing up for a little while. I'm just going to lay back and take a breather for a millennia or two.
Can he do that? We don't know. That's the problem. As Camus points out, we don't know anything about Sisyphus really in the underworld. We don't have any stories about Sisyphus in the underworld.
He got rocks to roll.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we know. So...
And we all know you can't stop the rock.
Yeah, anyway.
I mean, you're talking about... Sisyphus presumably has human psychology.
I would assume that he does.
Even as a shade. So, on a time scale that's smallest part is eternity, he would probably lose his mind a few times, on an infinite amount of times, and regain his sanity an infinite amount of times, lose his meaning an infinite number of times, regain it an infinite number of times. So,
at what point do these cycles settle on anything?
I don't know. I mean, your time scale is eternity.
Can we reasonably assume that at some point there would be a rut along which it settles?
When the gods finally say, who are you again? Why are you doing that?
The gods themselves forget why he's there?
Who's the guy with the rock? Who did this?
I mean...
You did, you son of a bitch!
On a long enough time scale, perhaps even the gods might forgive getting goofed on.
I think the guy with the rock ought to be up for parole. We can't even remember why he's doing it no more.
Why did the Greek gods become
I don't know.
New Yorkers?
Because it's funnier.
Yeah. It's also kind of an easier accent to do. I mean, do you know what a Greek accent sounds like?
I have a vague idea, but I've not practiced it.
Yeah, I don't know it either.
Giorgio Pacamachis.
Giorgio Pacamachis.
I mean...
Only Club Kalash.
Well, do you have anything to drink? Mountain Dew and crab juice.
Yep.
Ew. I'll take the crab
I'll
juice.
take the crab juice.
Well,
So at what point does that happen? I mean, I need to know more about Sisyphus. I'd like to have a conversation about the guy before I start making judgments about when his mind's going to be lost.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily we need to know exactly when his mind's going to be lost, so much as will it be lost on a scale of eternity. What do you know about Sisyphus? Let's talk about Sisyphus.
Well, I know he has human psychology, as we just established. Humans don't. We're not programmed to think in scales of eternity. We're not.
we also know he's fucking yoked, you know? I mean, pushing that rock that long, you're going to build some upper body strength and the legs.
What about Sisyphus before the whole rock thing? Because there were other stories about Sisyphus before that went down.
Well, I do recall that the reason he's there is because he kind of goofed on the gods a lot.
He did goof on the gods.
Like, even the guy who, runs the underworld where he currently is.
Death. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
There's some resentment there.
Pluto.
Something that I noticed
or
in that, speaking
Hades.
of he was talking about death being a personified her. Hades is not death. That is Persephone. That's why she's referred to as Dread Persephone. Hades just runs the underworld.
But Persephone is death
In
Greek mythology.
in some tellings of Greek mythology.
Okay.
Depends on, we're talking about Greek mythology. This isn't like, okay, everything is set in stone here. No, this is like 1,000 years of different retellings. So in some tellings she is death, in some she's just Hades' wife.
In some tellings, she's a cute goth girl.
But she does have the, what is it? I don't want to say title, moniker of Dread Persephone. Relating to death and rebirth.
So, a psychopomp.
Yeah.
Yes, she is a psychopomp.
Psychopimp.
So, but I mean, the that's one of the stories of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is that he actually, it's not the first time he dies, right? This is actually at least the second time. I don't know how many times, but at least the second.
He only dies once, but his shade goes back to the overworld and is then dragged back.
So okay, that's the part I wasn't sure about. So his shade is still his shade while he's enjoying life for
Yes.
however long. Okay, that I wasn't clear on that one. Okay, so basically, I mean, for the people who are listening, if they're not aware of that particular story, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I just did.
Well, there's more to the story than that, though.
You know as much as I do on that one. I don't know. I know the concept of the shade, which is your soul, kinda. It's you.
Well, I mean the story of how that situation all went down.
I recall what we kind of rehearsed.
Yeah.
That the reason he does come back is because he actually...
Well, he wants to bitch at his ex-wife.
Yeah.
For doing what he told her to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess he told her to do it, and then he's like, well, she's not going to do it. She loves me too much. She fucking did it. Oh, hell no. Come on. Let me go bitch at my wife. No. Let me go bitch at my wife. No. Let me go bitch at my wife. Okay, fine.
How long did that take?
I mean, she did not... Presumably a short enough amount of time that she didn't die prior. Otherwise, she would just waited till she got there and bitched her out then. So... he was allowed a limited amount of time up, and he said, fuck that. I like it up here.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't suck up here. Oh, yeah, it doesn't suck up here. I'm going to hang out here for a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's nice and warm.
And he had incapacitated death for a while prior to that. I think that's what got him killed the first time, if I'm not mistaken. He had incapacitated death at some point. I don't remember the details of it, but he had sort of put death in chains or something along those lines.
Okay. Didn't he also try to withhold information from the gods for a favor? And it's like, no, fuck you.
He didn't withhold information. Actually, it was the opposite of that. Somebody's daughter had gotten kidnapped by the gods, and Sisyphus knew about it and agreed to tell about what had happened.
And then Snitches got stitches.
Yeah, well, but it was because, and this is important for Sisyphus's character, it was because Sisyphus didn't take the gods particularly seriously, as we established. But Sisyphus agreed to tell that story to reveal what had happened to that girl in regards to the gods in exchange for water to be taken to the citadel
Of Corinth.
Of Corinth, yeah. And because he valued practical gain more than he valued, whatever the gods were peddling to people at that time.
Rape, by the sound of it.
Among other things, yeah.
Rape, infidelity.
So we have a character who is much more closely associates himself and virtue with humans, and not so much gods. There's a resentment there for the gods.
Yeah,
In particular, death, it seems.
Well, it is why he's stuck in a shitty situation.
It was his love of life that made him despise death.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Persephone wasn't a bad character.
No.
She's just doing her job, man.
And, didn't exactly pick it. Hades
Well,
was a bit
no,
forward.
she kind of did.
She did okay, yeah, going an entire year without eating anything. That's a bit of coercion there, even for a supernatural spirit, and now, well, has to stay in the underworld for about 6 months because she ate too many fucking pomegranate seeds.
Yeah, but she eventually did, like, she chose to stay. She did, like, she and Hades actually got along really well. He just kind of had to go up there and, like, come on, I need to show you what I'm all about.
Oh.
Hades wasn't a bad dude.
I'm not such a bad guy. I'm just I just overlook hell. I'm not the guy that goes and kills people.
And it's not hell, it's the underworld.
Well, yeah.
There's a difference between
the underworld isn't predicated on punishment necessarily.
It's just where you go when you die.
He also didn't even pick to rule it.
Yeah, it was the one job that was left open, and he's like, all right, I'll do it.
Oh, no, not even that. They drew lots to decide who ran what. And he got the shortest one.
So he got the underworld.
And he literally got the short end of the stick.
But he just does his job. He's pretty reasonable about it.
Yeah. When he invented
Persephone they are the one in Greek mythology. Him and Persephone are the one healthy relationship that's actually in that whole mythology.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it makes sense because they're the one relation. They're like the two people that sort of accept the weirdness of their situation. It's like, well, you know what? All right, I'll do the job.
It's going to be the best underworld I can make it.
He doesn't do such a bad job.
Yeah. Hey, babe. After the next reaping, could you bring me a wine?
But now let's talk how Sisyphus gets his groove back.
Yes, how Sisyphus gets his groove back, in theory. So, Camus suggests that Sisyphus could deal with the absurdity of his predicament by accepting the absurdity of his predicament.
Accepting the absurdity of his predicament, but also rebelling against it.
How is he rebelling against it?
I'm not real sure on that, but I picked that up in the reading.
Yeah, I think it's the idea that by it's almost like to me it comes across kind of childish and petulant. It's like, well, you think this is torment, but I'm not going to treat it like torment. That'll show you. It's like, yeah, but you're doing it forever.
Well,
we'll see how long you last.
He continues to choose to do it, I guess, as part
That's
of it.
the idea, that he could continue to choose to do it, and that's the issue that I take with it. Because for a lifetime, sure, he could probably manage that amount of contrarianism for about 80 or so years. But how much longer?
I mean, he might continue it for 80 years and then take 80 years off, and then like, all right, I'm bored. I guess I'll roll the rock. It's been a while.
If he has that kind of freedom, but then it's not really much of a punishment, is it?
I hear it's what the Scandinavians are going for.
Okay, well, we'll see how it turns out. Then maybe we'll get an answer to our question.
Fun fact: Sisyphus' rock brought to you by IKEA.
Yes. It actually comes in pebbles. You have to assemble it yourself.
Well,
it's actually just a giant Swiss meatball. Or Swedish meatball.
Well,
that has been out in the sun so long it turned into a boulder.
Petrified.
Well, I think how he could get his groove back is trying to find some enjoyment in it. Like, not so much the task itself, but figuring out, can I, with the impacts of the rock, once they hit the bottom of the mountain, spell, fuck you, Hades.
How long is that going to sustain him? That reminds me
Until it's done.
That reminds me of the Seymour Skinner thing. There's the episode of The Simpsons where They think that Skinner. It was the episode where Bart becomes he works for the mob, and Skinner goes missing and blah blah blah. But Skinner has this thing where he has Bart's on detention and he has him licking envelopes, and he says, "Well, you could make this a game. Just see how many envelopes you can lick, and then try to break in like an hour or something, and then try and break that record." Like, okay, 2 hours pass, I'm done. Had enough of this. This isn't going to get any more interesting than it is in this moment.
I mean, I've never been in Sisyphus' situation.
You've worked in warehouses, of course you have.
No.
Just for a few hours, but
No, I've worked in warehouses for well over a year.
Oh.
What do you think a deltalogist was?
What do you think I've done for 5 years?
Well, I mean...
Try to imagine doing that task for eternity and what that would do to you. Mentally. Biologically even, regardless of whether or not you're a shade. There's a biology to your mentality, I would say.
Yeah,
What would it do to you?
Who knows? Basically catatonic as you... Oh, that's how he gets his groove back, by just abandoning sapience. Sapience.
Explore that, Nick. I might be happening to be going that direction.
Why didn't you just go that direction?
Well...
Because I wanted there to be some suspense, okay?
All right, Hathcock. Hitchcock. Hathcock was a sniper. Sorry. You're not deserving of that name.
Well, you can't really suffer if you aren't really aware of suffering. You just kind of zone out completely, just disappear into your own mind.
Getting colder.
Answering through solipsism?
Well, I mean...
Answering through solipsism.
Camus does say within each individual emotion there's an entire universe, so you got quite a bit to explore just in your own inner space, I guess.
Again, eternity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to even one universe, so we don't even know if that's finite.
Still incomparable to eternity.
Universe, man.
Right, because infinity is not comparable to eternity.
Well, if you're talking about the existence of a universe, the universe had some beginning, it had some ending.
And so did Sisyphus' task, right?
No.
No, it had a beginning.
Well, it had a beginning.
All things
Right.
that have beginnings have endings.
Not this one.
Okay, well, we don't know that the universe is finite. So if you take the interpretation that a universe is not finite, then yeah, you could retreat into into an infinite universe of your own belief and your own making, as long as that is.
Yeah, but all this is stemming from a turn of phrase.
People go nuts all the time.
What I'm saying is that over the course of an eternity, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself on a single task. Period.
We do not know how crazy Sisyphus can infinitely get.
Here's my argument.
It's not. You don't necessarily have to go crazy. Go on.
It has nothing to do with going crazy. It has nothing to do with any of that. My argument is that we're dealing with eternity, so Sisyphus is literally performing precisely the same task with absolutely no end. This is an infinite, futile process.
As has been established.
Yeah.
Get on with it!
My argument is that when you think about how the mind is going to take to that particular situation, and we'll go back to Camus. So he says, well, if Sisyphus sort of accepts the absurdity of his tasks, that's in a way basically kind of giving the middle finger to the gods. It's like, yeah, okay, how long is that going to last, though? My argument, and I've said this many times now, is that over a long enough period of time, the mentality of a creature that is going to perform the exact same task over and over and over again for eternity, the the environment, we'll say the space of their thinking, like literally the environment of their thought, is narrow. They can only think about so much for so long. Eventually, there has to be an acceptance of the narrowness of their existence along the scale of eternity. This pushing the boulder up the mountain, watching it roll down, walking back down, and pushing it back up. That is eternity to them.
Yes, you're saying the same thing over and over again.
There is no Sisyphus, only rock.
Eventually, you're going to get stuck in a rut. A rut of acceptance of the task. So we're getting to the point where Camus is talking about, well, you accept the task. Yeah, but that has as far as I can tell, I think that would have a different result than Camus seems to suggest. Because my argument is that the agency is going to deteriorate. The consciousness is going to dissolve because the only thing you have left is the task. So every part of you over a long enough period of time is going to atrophy other than only what is necessary to accomplish that task. I think that the actual punishment of Sisyphus isn't the torment of literally an eternity of pushing the rock up the hill, right, and then watching it roll down, that sort of thing. I think the punishment is the very gradual deterioration of Sisyphus's agency, of getting stuck in that rut and becoming what, after a while, over a long enough time, being relegated to what is essentially a moving statue. A
piece of power equipment.
Yeah, a machine that really only stands as a monument to...
You're not just talking about losing agency, you're talking about losing dynamism.
Yeah. Over a long enough period of time when your existence is relegated to one specific task, everything about you is going to fall off except for the things that are necessary to accomplish that task.
Well, I think coming in defense of Camus on this, I think the defiant triumph would become necessary to continue the task.
What is that?
I mean, because you still got to have the motivation to keep doing it, and if you get your motivation from that,
why do you need the motivation to keep doing it?
You know, it's like doing any repetitive task. You have to keep motivating yourself to do it.
What happens when he no longer has the motivation to do it?
Well, then he doesn't do it. That would be What happens when he doesn't have the motivation to do it? Well, then it doesn't get done. Well,
what do the gods do in that situation?
We don't know.
That's his punishment. He has to do it for eternity, which means he's going to do it for eternity.
What worse can they do to him?
Well, then the gods gave him that same motivation and triumph to keep doing it. If that's how this has to work, they had to have given him all the mental tools as well to keep it going.
Well, they had to give him, at minimum, the physical capability of continuing it. At minimum.
No, you're talking about eternity.
Yeah.
He would have had to have the psychological and mental urge to keep doing it. If that
urge? Well, then it's not punishment.
He has to keep doing it.
Well, then it's not a punishment.
Because what keeps him from... Like, what happens if he stops doing it?
No,
he can't stop doing it.
Exactly. So he has to have that going. Well, otherwise, his mind would break and the thing would just stop.
Well, I think in that situation, what you're probably dealing with is... And
we're kind of approaching a chicken and the egg situation
here.
Well,
not necessarily, but we are definitely approaching an issue of a distinction between Sisyphus's physical compulsion to roll the rock up the hill versus the way that his brain is or his mind is reacting to that. Yeah.
Actually, in Greek mythology and a lot of other cultures, madness is considered a curse from the gods in a lot of cases. Maybe what they did was flip a switch in his brain. This is what what's obsessive compulsive disorder is making you do now. It's not that, like, his thing is he has to get that rock to the top of the mountain and get it to stay there.
So, I mean, he's been cursed with the desire that he can't shed himself of.
Yeah.
No, that's something, and that actually could be, because you're dealing with gods, that could be something that keeps his consciousness eternally existent. It's just the torment forever.
Yeah. Hell. Flick the switch, press the reset button, Sisyphus is now running. And you perform a full hard drive reset. He doesn't remember the last 200 million years he's been rolling that rock.
Yeah, if he doesn't remember it though, where's the well?
He has to do it again.
Yeah, but where's the real joy and knowing, and like knowing that he knows that he's been doing it for as long as he has,
And not knowing?
and knowing, like, you would think that if you really want this to be the maximum torment possible, that dude needs to know how long he's been doing this.
Maybe every millennia they give him a reminder. Like, okay, we have your scoreboard up. You've done it this many times.
Bing!
Now try to do it faster next time.
But knowing that he's going to do it for eternity, like, we're getting into a lot of speculation here, so that's part of the problem they're running into. But
like Camus said, we don't know Sisyphus, nor do you know the gods truly know the gods tormenting him.
Yeah, we can only judge him by his actions and what he said.
well, for judging him by his actions, then he's a machine. He's a robot. He's got no agency. Because all he's doing is rolling that rock up the.
But prior to that, we only saw what Sisyphus has done.
True.
We know what he's doing, but that what he's doing doesn't necessarily have much on his who he actually is.
Well,
the gods removed his agency from him.
It's a punishment for who he was.
They removed his agency. He has no choice but to roll his rock.
Right.
So let's look at Sisyphus when he had agency.
Okay. Well, I mean, when Sisyphus had agency, there was a resentment, a resentment toward the gods, I would say, to a certain extent.
I wouldn't necessarily say resentment, just a dismissal.
Certainly a dismissal. But I would argue
I'm not picking up much resentment until.
Well, it's not just a dismissal because he acted actively against them. I mean, he put death in chains. Literally put death in chains. That's an active resistance. That's not just a dismissal. There's an ideological issue there.
And they clashed with her dress.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because I think part of, now this might be reaching a bit, but I think part of the idea behind the punishment of Sisyphus is that this is a character who denied death. That's essentially what he did. Like, he did a whole bunch of stuff before that, but it was really the denying of death that got him in the most trouble. My theory behind the justification for that kind of punishment is that in denying death, you deny the mechanism for rebirth. Right? He tried to have his rebirth without learning anything. I think, and I don't know if that's the reason behind the story or not, but I can construe it that way in a way. And to me, it makes sense.
They don't really have a reincarnation thing.
It's not a literal reincarnation. It's the idea that it's kind of that whole hero's journey thing, right? Where you sort of get to a point where you need to shed something about yourself so that you can become something better.
20 more pounds or I'll never be pretty.
But yeah, so and that's Sisyphus's issue, is that he, from what I can tell, is that he didn't, in denying death, you sort of deny the necessity of death. And if you deny the necessity of death as a symbol or as an idea, then there's a sense that you're denying the need to change, because that's, I mean, he begs, for lack of better words, begs death to return so that he could chastise his wife for doing exactly what he told her to do. Right? There's a lesson that he refused to learn in that. And instead of learning that lesson, he wanted to go back and chastise somebody else for making a mistake that he told them to make. So I think, and that's the reason. I think that's the reason I look at the end of that story the way that I do, where the punishment seems to fit the crime, if you construe it that way, where it's Sisyphus was denying death, so denying himself the possibility of rebirth, and so he gets stuck in a rut with the Sisyphean task, the futile task of rolling the boulder up the hill, because there's no progressing from that point. There's the pretend, like there's the affectation of progressing, but it never actually happens.
And all the other shades are just calling him sissy face and telling him to stop rolling that rock if he really wants to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Stoop kid's afraid to leave his stoop.
But he did leave his stoop, though. He eventually left the stoop.
Not the rock.
True. Sisyphus.
Maybe
so I guess what we're really getting at here, the whole point of this episode, is that Stoop Kid is cooler than Sisyphus.
Except when he learns he can roll the rock towards the other shades.
See, I was thinking, you're already dead. You can't die again. You got eternity to get used to the pain. It's like, all right, I'm turning this into my own roller coaster. I'm going to push the rock and then hold on.
I tried one of those, like, lumberjack log running things.
A log roll?
Yeah.
How fast can I get the rock going?
And that's how Sisyphus got his groove back.
Like, does he have to walk after? Can he ride the rock?
I just assumed that there was like a stop at the bottom, like something that stopped the rock, and then he would have to run back down and even walk. It doesn't matter how long it took him. And
Probably
then just
gravity.
Start pushing it back up. Just sort of settled at the bottom, and then he's got to push it back up.
And just jump off the mountain.
Sisyphus is a platformer.
And then it plays backwards. It's going down.
Okay.
Huh.
Well,
I believe we've solved nothing at all.
I feel like maybe it would be a good idea if we just... Because, we didn't get anywhere, so maybe we should start at the beginning again.
We're at 32 minutes, man.
And try to parse this out. I don't think we were successful the first time.
Well, we'll be back after our sponsors.